Hello again and welcome to the programme which brings together leading British commentators with journalists from overseas who write, blog, podcast and broadcast to audiences in their home countries from here, the Dateline London. This week, Liz the Disruptor, Emmanuel the Moderniser, Vlad the Invader. The first has a comfortable majority but has already had to wave the white flag. The second vowed to reform and the voters promptly deprived him of his majority with which to do it. And the third can ignore his parliament but perhaps not the people who are voting with their feet. Leadership, who wants it? In the studio to discuss that triumvirate, a Dateline triumvirate, Geoffrey Kaufman, who's anchored news programmes in both his native Canada and the United States and reported from the front line. Mark Roche, a Belgian-born economist who writes for the French news magazine Le Point, and Polly Toynbee, weekly columnist with The Guardian for almost a quarter of a century. Now, welcome to all of you as ever. It's lovely to have you with us on this, the penultimate Dateline. Let's start with Liz Truss and her week. Mark, you're an economist. You're someone I think it's fair to say is not unsympathetic with Conservative values. What do you make of the U-turn on the top rate of tax?
Well, it was not a project of an industrialized G7 countries. It was, this tax cut was simply like in emerging country, where you launch policies, but you don't say how you will finance it. You might do borrowing or etc., but you don't say. It was astonishing, even if some of the measures make sense, like, you know, the bonus, why not to attract bankers back to London to compete with New York or Singapore. You can say the freezing of the corporate tax will be good for small and medium companies and will do growth. But really diminishing abruptly. Not only is it a very unsocial, unthinkable on the continent, unthinkable in France. You will have a revolution. It's terrible at a time of high deficit, and it'll be even a bigger deficit. So what the mystery of it all is, of course, that the rate of borrowing of the UK is still very low. It's almost like the US but, or France, but it'll come where the market, which have shown already unhappiness. You know, this plan is influenced by the Chancellor being a hedge fund man. He worked in the hedge fund. Hedge fund, thanks to him, have done a killing with betting against the pounds. Instead of siding with the city, which is helping investment, industry and commercial banking, they have sided with the parasite, the speculators.
Polly, the next battleground is going to be public spending. I mean, we keep going on about unfunded tax cuts, £43 billion worth. Inflation's already eating into public spending. Departmental budgets that were set before inflation shot up will in real terms have shrunk quite a lot. Where are they going to cut? Where can they possibly cut when they're only 2 years out from an election?
There is really nowhere for them to cut because we've had, after all, 12 years of austerity. I mean, ever since 2010, when the Conservatives came in, their very first budget was to cut again, huge amounts from benefits and from every department. And as a result, there is a backlog in every public services. I mean, quite extraordinary. I would think exceptional in Europe to have a court system that has collapsed, so that if the police arrest somebody, want to take them to the court, it might be 2 or 3 years before their case comes up in court. They shut down a whole lot of courts, they fired a whole lot of people, and you know, that's just one example. But the health service is on its knees, despite the fact it having been cut a bit less than the others. The social care system is almost kind of non-existent. I don't think she has any room for manoeuvre with any cuts. And what's interesting is that the public polling and the focus groups are all saying, we didn't really need a tax cut. We needed our public services to work. We need schools to work. I mean, teachers are paid 8% less than they were in 2010. Health service workers paid less. You can't operate in that way, particularly when you've got huge numbers of vacancies and a shortage of people to fill jobs. And so I think whichever way she turns now, she's stuck. And tax cuts are regarded as a massive mistake.
Benefit cuts is the one that, and already there's a cabinet fight over that, because it's clear that some of the cabinet colleagues are quite willing to say publicly they wouldn't go for that.
Extraordinary. At the conference itself, have cabinet members actually saying, don't do this, because her tax cuts have already given 40 times more to people at the top than people at the bottom.
Well, they would have done if they hadn't been the gross fund.
No.
Even allowing for the 45.
Allowing for that. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says, even when you allowing for the top tax cut having been taken away again, within the existing structure of income tax, that's what's happened. I mean, that's just not publicly acceptable.
Jeffrey, she did promise to be a disruptor.
She promised to be a disruptor based on phony economics, this zombie economics of saying Reagan did it. If we look at history, Reagan's tax cuts,
Why not for us?
They didn't work. That is the point. If you read any serious economic analysis of the 1980s in the U.S., those tax cuts did not. They trickled down.
Back, wasn't there?
The bounce back happened when Clinton raised taxes, in fact, and this idea that cutting it for the rich somehow makes the rest of us better off. I mean, it's an absurd ideology, and what you're seeing clearly is that this country is in the grip of the right-wing version of a Trotskyite. She is such a believer in her own perfect view of the way we should go. I kind of feel like it's the flip side of the Jeremy Corbyn coin, that they know better than we do what's good for us, and don't let the facts get in the way.
Now, she would say you've signed up to the anti-growth coalition.
Well, but she would, and these are very good rhetorical. This is kind of like Build Back Better and all of those three-word rhymes that allow them to say just get it done or get Brexit done, whatever it was. This kind of she's hoping that it sticks and she can distract us with this kind of empty rhetoric. The reality is that I think the people of Britain really need to ask themselves what's going on. We had a negligent Prime Minister in Cameron who let the referendum happen, thinking he could just sail through. We had a rudderless Prime Minister in May. We had a narcissistic, vacuous Prime Minister in Johnson, and now you have this ideologue. And I think the people of this country, it is interesting. The polls are so in favor of Labour. It's 2 years away. The world will change. But maybe this country's ready for someone who is boring, someone who's just an earnest doer like Keir Starmer. But it's a long way between now and then.
It's a long way, and you would not advise them not to count any chickens, presumably, given the history of this country.
I have lived through so many times when Labour was about to win the election.
Absolutely.
But this time really is exceptional, and all the pollsters say so. They've never seen anything like this. The move has been faster and deeper than ever before towards Labour.
But the fear for people on that side of the politics, presumably, is it could be shallow. If it's gone one way, it can equally go back.
But on the other hand, that level of unpopularity you don't recover from. You've gone into a black hole from which the pollsters say no leader has ever returned.
It's hard to imagine after 30-something days that they would change leaders again, and it would be very hard to do that. But the reality is that we know politicians want to keep their jobs, and ultimately they will support exactly. But they're much more volatile.
Yes.
And much more vulnerable.
Her out. About 180 of them are due to lose their seats. They can see it all there, and they won't let it happen.
She has
but
they have
no other solution because nobody else can save them now. It's too late.
You don't think Rishi Sunak could come in and?
He could, but I mean, he never had very much popular support either. I mean, he'd be better probably.
It's like the end of the major year,
yes,
isn't it?
It's
Blair,
exactly like
whatever
that.
happened, we knew Blair will win, and this time I agree completely.
Do you think it feels the same?
Oh, it feels completely the same.
Even
I lived through the...
There was a Blair mania in the 90s. There's no Starmer mania, is there?
Yeah,
well,
but
we've only had 3 weeks of this. Wait and see.
And Major was... He tried everything, and there were scandals and rebellion and Europe and Maastricht and all that, and that left it to Blair to win and take it.
There's an old political axiom which I think may apply, but let's talk in 2 years. We'll convene a special edition.
We will.
That says that elections aren't won, they're lost. Yes. And I think this is very much setting up that possibility. But I'm completely aligned with Polly. It is far too. That is the distant future.
You're not putting any cash on it.
We're definitely not putting any cash on it.
On EU membership, Polly, Liz Truss is a Remainer turned enthusiastic Brexiteer. As Foreign Secretary, she wasn't sure whether or not Emmanuel Macron was friend or foe. And this week, there she was in Prague doing the grab and grin for the cameras with that certainly suspect monsieur, signing up to his political project, a European political community of all things. What's going on?
Absolutely fascinating, because she has been rigid on everything else. I mean, really ideological, far to the right of Boris Johnson or most of her party. And Brexit was the mainstay. And suddenly we see her easing up. And I think the reason is this, that when she looks at the polls, at the focus groups of public opinion, they have had it with Brexit. There has been a swing against it, but above all, get this done. You said you'd got this done. How can we be having, wars with Europe? We thought it was all over. We thought a deal had been struck. So I think she just wants it to go away. And there will be peace, and it sounds as if the Europeans have understood that that's her message, and they're themselves now sending better messages.
There's definitely a change of tone now.
She will have to take off the table this bill that she's passed to say that she will unilaterally break the treaty. That will have to be taken away. But it's all very doable. I mean, everybody wants peace except, the maddest of Brexiters.
Poor Europeans, Britain is back.
Well, hang on a minute. This European political community is 27 EU members plus another 17.
Yes.
It's everybody, basically.
Only a French president like Emmanuel Macron could invent something completely surreal, Cartesian in his mind, and deliver it, because that's important. It is the configuration of the future of Europe, a confederation of a nucleus, the European Union, and then the 10 states who want to join and can't,
I'm intrigued.
and then
Isn't
Britain and others.
Forgive me for being a bit old-fashioned about this, but isn't this what used to be called the multi-speed Europe?
Yes, and Britain wanted that. The French didn't.
We
want
got our
that.
way in the end.
Well, no, because the European Union is stronger than ever. The proof is 10 countries want to join, and they can't join because of the financial thing. But also, it's a great idea because it brings Britain back and others back into the fold.
This is also expedient for Liz Truss, because I think there's a long history of politicians having terrible trouble at home, making themselves into internationalists, going on world tours, being seen on the stage. Some of the world leaders were saying some of the European leaders, what a terrific prime minister she is. It's one, it's a distraction for her. Two, it's probably a lot more fun than sitting in the House of Commons. But it allows her to say, look, I can be a statesman, I can do these things, and giving a little ground, and maybe there's a bit of Nixon in China here. There's
also a Macron there, because Macron himself has no majority. There will be strike in France, big discontent, National Front stronger than ever, extreme left stronger than ever. And what does he do? He goes abroad.
He did his he won his, obviously, second term as president. He then repeated his determination to do what he hadn't done in his first term, get pension reform to, I think it's raised from 62 to 64 or 5, isn't it? And the voters then deprived him of the majority with which to do it. Is he a lame duck at home?
No, and anyway, at the end, he's finished. There's only 2 terms. Yeah. But I think more than ever, the people don't like him. They find him as a cold technocrat. The French are emotional people. The British are not. And so the French see themselves, they have to like. They
won't rise to
Chirac.
that.
Said the Belgian.
But if his legacy... But Mark, if his legacy if his legacy is to leave behind this multi-speed Europe, to pull a much bigger brotherhood, sisterhood of states together at a time when we were back into a Cold War state of mind, that will have been a great thing to do. A real sense that Europe shares democratic ideals. Around the edges, Poland, Hungary, a bit worried about some of their democratic ideals, but nevertheless, basically, it is democracies, and that's helpful for America too, for the strengthening of NATO. I think that Ukraine has suddenly concentrated everybody's mind. Who are we? Whose side are we on? What are our values, really? And I think Macron has brought that together very well.
Even if it is, it's a strange reassembling. We have Turkey who refused sanction. You have Azerbaijan, Armenia at war. You have Kosovo and Serbia who can't stand each other. Nevertheless, I agree with you. It's important. It might be the only Macron legacy because in Africa he has failed also. So.
And Truss also needs Macron to solve the immigration issue across the channel. She can't do this without bilateral cooperation.
And they did issue a statement saying we're going to renew again our efforts to do that. Whether they will achieve,
pay a lot more money to the French to try and keep that very large coastline.
That's not going to help with the public spending
Very
cuts.
difficult.
Mark, you mentioned Africa. We'll park that for now, the intervention in the Sahel, which clearly he got out again pretty soon afterwards. And one thing he did say on Friday was that he thought that the winter next year is going to be tougher than the winter this year, which is pretty ominous in terms of energy. We should probably talk about President Putin, the birthday boy.
70 years old today. 70 years, yeah.
Somebody gave him a mountain of melons.
I didn't see that. I did see that there were a lot of there were a lot of orchestrated
and there was a
parties for him or celebrations.
A gift certificate from the president of Belarus for a tractor.
Yes.
I don't know why you couldn't just give him a tractor, but anyway, it's another story. We don't have time for that. Just in terms of the situation he finds himself in, he said earlier this week, look, he thinks the situation is going to stabilise in Ukraine.
I think it's more unstable than it's ever been, and I think it's actually. I don't want to be a Chicken Little here, but I do think it's really alarming. This could go any way from. It wouldn't surprise me to wake up one day and discover someone had put a bullet in him, or that he detonated some minor nuclear bomb. I think those are the extremes, and I hate to sort of have such a. It's such an open-ended question, but the blowback he's now getting this week is really extraordinary. People in his own military are standing up and questioning him, and it's starting to unleash more and more. And that's when you start to feel like maybe his iron grip is not so solid.
But the problem is, as all military strategists have always said, give your enemy an exit. He has no exit strategy. I can't see what he can do other than utterly humiliate himself. I can't see a way out.
And it was fascinating to hear Joe Biden actually almost say that in public, to talk that through, saying we're trying to work out what would be the exit strategy.
Because the Ukrainians won't give up some of their territory after what they've gone through. And I think you're right. What else, what do they give him? It's utter humiliation. But right now he's being humiliated, and the evidence suggests that the troops are ill-trained, ill-equipped, and demoralized. You can't win a war no matter how many more forced conscripts you throw at it under those circumstances.
And of course, he could say, I had a victory at the OPEP when they diminish the production. Russia is not member of the organization. It's an associate member, but they were in Vienna. But
why does it help Putin? Just to explain that, if you would.
It gives him money. There will be more income.
Because the oil price will stay up.
To finance the war effort. But it's a short-term thing because the West is going into recession, so there will be less oil. There is already a big discount of Russian oil because European buyers are a bit reluctant because the public opinion forces them. And on the whole, EU and US are deciding to put a cap of the price of Russian oil. So short-term victory, but there again he has lost on the oil thing. Of course, he has this big thing which is gas, which is completely different.
He's also, I think when you see this mass exodus of young men, because it is men, the potential conscripts.
As I said, people voting with their feet by leaving the country where they could.
Listen, our focus should be on the destruction of Ukraine and this kind of obliteration of everything as they retreat. But at the same time, his legacy for his own country is devastating. This mass exodus of high-skilled workers, many of whom will never return, is going to set Russia back 2 generations. And all of the aspirations to be a global power, a creative power, an industrial power, a technological power, are being destroyed by this willful blindness of his vanity and imperialism. It is so damaging in the long term.
And sanctions start to bite. The international sanctions, which everyone has criticized.
But they were always going to take a long time.
They are starting to buy. They can't get spare parts and etc. So it'll get worse for him. And so the catastrophe scenario is getting really scary.
But we shouldn't assume that things getting worse for him will necessarily produce the kind of Russia that we could again be friends with, because the danger is when something really bad happens to the country, they turn worse, not better. And if somebody...
That can happen at 10 Downing Street,
if somebody, yes, if somebody does get rid of him, one way or another, the chances are far more extreme people to the right, with, you know, far more militant
and with their
dictators
on
will
the
take
nuclear
over.
bomb.
So it, and yes, and much more slap happy about nuclear arms, and so it's quite scary.
Yep.
There is, you know, again, there's not a good option that I can see happening. I don't think there's going to be a sudden liberal blossoming
we
in
better
Russia.
stick with him then. You
Well,
don't
with
know
him and
what's
perpetual
coming
war.
next.
Holding on
It
to
means-
nurse for fear of something worse, they used
Just
to
means
say,
a
didn't
war
they?
that never goes away in that poor benighted zone.
And that's a terrible thought
That's
for those who have to live in it. Jeffrey, we mentioned OPEC. I mean, we'll talk more about the States next week, looking ahead to the midterms. We'll talk more about China, looking ahead to President Xi's probable third term. Just on Biden, though, I mean, it's an embarrassment, at least for him, isn't it? After fist bump with Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it is. It's
basically,
humiliating.
so thank you very much for coming, Mr. President. And no, we're not going to do what you want.
And he went, and, you know, we know that MBS, as he's called, you know, we know, you know, his record with Adnan Khashoggi, the journalist, the dissident journalist who was literally hacked up with a buzzsaw in the Saudi embassy in Turkey. It was uncomfortable enough that Biden went and actually bumped fists with him. But now it is really it's a very uncomfortable moment, to say the least. And
I think it has to be a lesson for the whole world. You just, well, democratic world, you don't compromise with monsters. And, you know, Saudi Arabia has always sort of been the exception, but actually they're not. You just have to treat them, I think, with the long spoon that you always should have done. I think the idea that you can pretend they're friends, you might have to negotiate on certain things, but not friends or allies.
But monsters with a lot of oil seem to have more influence than monsters
well, we've got
without.
to get off oil.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the reason why we have to go green, because it will free us from dependence on dictators from Putin to MBS.
One common enemy Saudi Arabia and the West have, and certainly the United States, is Iran, or the regime in Iran. We've been talking about leadership. The protests over the death of Mahsa Amini reached a kind of emperor's got no clothes moment, didn't they? That's extraordinary footage of schoolgirls apparently kind of berating a member of the Basij paramilitaries. I think the phrase was "get lost, Basiji." I mean, it's astonishing. But how serious a threat to the 43-year-old Islamic Republic do you think this protest is? I mean, people might want it to be, but is it?
I think we all suffer from wishful thinking when we see rebellions in countries that where we despise the leadership. I mean, those girls are unbelievably brave, and it's hard to believe that there won't be revenge against them and their families in one way or another.
Never mind the ones who've already been shot down.
We've seen uprisings before in Iran. Yes. We know what a lot of people in Iran want and feel, and each time they get put down. I mean, think what we've seen in Belarus, where we thought for a moment there was going to be freedom in Belarus, utterly crushed. It is very, very difficult to rebel against monstrous dictators who have all of the weapons and all of the police force on their side. I mean, each time we hope this might be... I mean, think about, you know, the great spring rebellions that we all hope for so much from. And
now even Tunisia has lost its democratic
look
cover.
at all these places. Yeah. So we have to be very careful about encouraging people to do things that are really dangerous.
Yep, I agree. I think that the best hope, you know, we've seen this before. The Ayatollah is unbelievably conservative and harsh, brutal, and he's 83. And I think the best hope is that when he dies, there's an opportunity. But even then, you know, I covered Cuba, and Castro was not like the Ayatollah, but, you know, Castro died, and the regime stayed. So they're just. I agree with you. We can wish and we can know what we think should be the outcome, but it doesn't. But the world doesn't work that way.
And we should be careful not to offer people encouragement without giving them any actual help.
But what's really worrying on top of it all, in the unsecure world we are living in, it's impossible now to have an agreement on nuclear with Iran, because the hardliner won't want it, the opinion in the West won't want it, so we might soon have a side of Ukraine, have now the Middle East problems with atomic weapons.
It's a pretty disturbing prospect, isn't it? Well, look, Polly Toynbee, Geoffrey Kaufman and Mark Roche, thank you all very much. Thank you for being in Dateline over many years. You won't be with us, sadly, next week. I do hope you'll be with us next week for the final edition of Dateline London. After 25 years, we'll have at least one guest who was there right at the start will be joining me next week. We will be talking, as I say, about the US midterms and the prospects for China. Looking ahead, not looking backwards, is what we try and keep doing. Thank you very much for being with us this week. See you same time next week. Goodbye.